Welcome back to another video here on the Point Three podcast. Everybody, we are your favorite trio of hosts, Lou, Spider Brando, and myself, Hero Scroll. Thank you so much for watching us. And if you haven't, make sure you subscribe to us and like this video. All that stuff really goes a long way for us. But we are officially continuing on the road to Superman. This time, if you haven't seen it on our social media videos, we are going to be dedicating the month of May to reading and talking about these awesome Superman stories. And today we are kicking that off with Kingdom Come. Kingdom Come, the 1996 miniseries by Mark Waid with awesome artwork by Alex Ross, going into many different topics. A lot of people potentially talking about it as one of the greatest comic books of all time. Spider Brando, I'm gonna throw this over to you, or should I say Super Brando for this video? Super Brando, I'm gonna kick this over to you. As someone who this is your first time reading the story, right? How did you feel with your experience in it?
It's a very interesting experience because it's very heavy of like a comic. As one who's kind of been getting into comics, like just for comparison, 4 All Seasons is a much easier read. They're both good, obviously, but Kingdom Come was definitely up there as one who was newer into it and kind of like, especially the 90s era of comics and getting that nice Mark Waid storytelling. Alex Ross art was beautiful, but it took me a little bit to kind of like fully understand certain themes in there. Did a lot of religious themes and symbolism in there. So it took me a little bit to understand it all, but other than that, it was like really, 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 really good book. You don't really need to know much about DC to kind of read it. Like I kind of thought you did, but once I found out that most of these people were kind of just like made up for the story, it made me appreciate it a lot more. I think definitely a lot more, and kind of know that it's its own like epilogue, own like separate kind of like Earth story. It cooks though, like insanely well.
Again, Alex Ross artwork is awesome, but yeah, this is definitely a book that I think gets better and better the longer you read it, or the more time has passed and the more you think about it, which leads me over to you, Lou, as someone that you told us before you read it a while ago, and now this is kind of your first time back revisiting it. How did you feel about the story?
Yeah, I think what's cool about this is reading the story again after going through the Marvels and the connection that Alex Ross had with that story in the 90s, and just kind of understanding more of the outside world of the comic realm at that time, and the partnership between Alex Ross and Mark Waid, of how they were just kind of a match made in heaven in a lot of ways. But what stuck out to me a lot more this time through, and actually read it twice through in the last week, is the visuals on the narrative and the combination between the two of them, and that marriage of just their minds and the presentation that they deliver from page to page, bubble to bubble. Everything about it just blends together to give you this story that, as you get through of the 4 issues, as you keep kind of going down this rabbit hole, whether you're looking through Norman's eyes or his conversations with the Spectre, and then once you flip over to Superman, and then you get more of the heroes, the anti-heroes, what the human element is, what the supervillain element is, then you get in Lex, and then with Bruce and Batman, and it's just such a blending of conflicting dynamics and morals and what is justice. And through the end of this, I think this time through was really the first time I could look at Kingdom Come and someone's like, what is this story about? And I would say hope. And for a lot of people, that's not the first word that comes to mind when you think about Kingdom Come. You think about a lot of just dark, heavy, biblically inspired revelations, doomsday, nuclear here, this, bomb that, there's no hope. But then at the end of this, you do get the meeting of Superman and Norman and hope that comes out of it. And then taking that and tying it in with just kind of what Alex Ross was envisioning for this, of hope that the older generation of superhero won't die based on all the new age things that are coming in with the anti-heroes and just the lack of morality and it's all about violence, and you can sift through all that. And I feel like this is like a definition of the light at the end of the tunnel. And you see that for Norman, you see it through Superman's eyes. And when you get to that final page, you feel it. And it took me a couple reads and just really being more well-versed into these stories to really pick up on that and to feel it versus just being told it.
For sure. And that's the very interesting thing too about this book, that I think that I remember it because I read it when I was relatively young for the first time. And then I got back into it with, I want to say like 7 years after that, probably like in my early 20s is when I started to read it again. And I do remember when I was young, I'm like, this is a dark book. Then revisiting, I'm like, no, there's something actually pretty light about it. It does have dark elements, but I wouldn't, again, as time goes on, I would not describe this book as a dark book. Not even in the slightest way. Again, it has very like apocalyptic vibes to it because of the biblical references. And I think a lot of people get kind of scared by biblical references to things. But ultimately, with what Alex Ross and Mark Waid are trying to say, both through the art and the writing, respectively, is what you said. It is that hope of your old golden age of hero, right?
Yeah.
In a time where, in the 90s, so for those that don't know, Lou kind of already alluded to it, but this book is looking at the lens through your old way of heroism is dying. A lot of people, that's actually kind of what this book kind of tackles, which I really like. Is a lot of people, you constantly hear them throw at Superman, oh, he's the Boy Scout, he's the goody two shoes. This is actually kind of an analysis of what that means for heroes in general, and what happens when that goody two shoes and you get a more violent type of hero, a more morally gray type of hero. What does that mean for the people? And honestly, for an entire fandom and industry, because this is looking at the comic book industry in the 90s, where a lot of your heroes coming out a little more darker, a little more violent, not a little more, a lot more violent, a little more morally gray. For example, you have Spawn coming out, you have people like Cable. This is what that envisioned, and what having the power of these heroes really means, and what you should do with it, which I think is really interesting, because not a lot of books are able to juggle all of these themes and concepts together.
And I like to that point too, because I think there are two main things that I didn't necessarily catch on the first run through, but it's that it's running, like you're saying, these themes in parallel, where you have power, right? Power is definitely on display here, but like, who enforces that and is enforcing power without having some sort of ideal? What road does that lead you down? And they show you this. And again, you kind of bring in that kind of hope and weave that kind of context in to show you do need humility, you do need compassion, you do need restraint, and that can be passed on as the next version of, in this case, say, metahumans come, right? Superman and the Justice League are the old guard, and then Magog and some of the newer ones are kind of the new reckless metahumans that are uber powerful. But then Hero, I think you said something about this too when you were talking offline, of like, with that human element through the lens of Norman, you also have the people who, when it comes to the trial, right, of Joker, you have that on full display on the stand of, you have Magog and then you have Superman before he departs, right? So I'm curious, do you want to touch on that for just a second? Because I think that's a really kind of cool point that I think can be glossed over in this, that I don't always hear people talk about, but I do think it's a really cool point that kind of shows you the impact of this story on multiple levels.
Yeah, no, for sure. So, and the point that Lou is referring to is here that one of the big pieces of the narrative is that Superman is kind of ousted out of the public. The public no longer have a trust in Superman because they feel like he's not able to protect them properly. Joker comes into the Daily Planet, kills a lot of people, and his arrest almost gets out, almost gets free of it too. In comes this new hero named Magog, who kills Joker in plain day, gets into a murder trial, gets acquitted because the people feel like he doesn't do anything wrong. And in the court of public opinion, there's a really cool panel that shows the newspaper, the Daily Planet newspaper, and 90% are on Magog's side. So they don't believe in Superman anymore. Again, going into that dying age of superheroes, and constantly, it's such a timely topic too, because we're constantly, how many people, when we talk about, well, what villain would you kill and what ramifications would that actually have? I think 9 times out of 10, people are constantly like, well, Joker should be killed. And there is a good base for that conversation, right? But I think this gives a very cool look as to what might happen if that happens. It might fix the short term, but does it really fix the long term in the universe?
Yeah.
And I love that that's how they view this, through like such a morally gray lens.
Which they pay that off so quickly with the whole incident of Kansas, where it's that recklessness of those heroes that aren't thinking before they're acting, that ultimately there's that run-in with Magog's team and Parasite, and then essentially you have that nuclear blast that wipes out Kansas and surrounding states. And that leads to more ramifications. But again, that carelessness, that recklessness, that I can do anything I want and run the streets type of mentality, that doesn't work and that doesn't fly. And I think that opens the door for enter Bruce Wayne Batman, re-enter Superman, and then also Lex Luthor. So SB, I'm curious your thoughts on the Batman aspect of the story and kind of his perspective of really being unaligned at first from Superman and then aligning with Lex, and kind of that morality duality type of, power struggle.
Lex had me in the first half, I'm not gonna lie. I was I remember I was dumbfounded and shocked when they had the panel of him choosing Lex's side. I was like, there's no way Batman would do this. Like, it's the heroes. And the next day when I finally read the next couple pages, I was like, damn, I feel bamboozled. So he had that nice switch up. But Batman was very interesting in this because a lot of their talking points are kind of just like about gods ruling amongst men pretty much, and humans, and obviously Batman and like superhumans and stuff being like gods, and Batman is just a regular old human, so he's always in that gray area for stuff like this. But obviously I was happy he ended up switching up and then telling Superman about Captain Marvel was still a thing, and to try to switch sides with him, or try to get Marvel to switch sides, not whatever Brie Larson, Captain Marvel, Shazam.
Captain Marvel before the cop.
I always forget about that. Shazam in this. So that was really cool. So Batman is always, like I said, he's always in that gray area of like, he's just a human, so he has humans to look out for, but he has all his superhero friends and stuff to look out for, but needs to know that he's got to keep them in check so that his humans don't go bye-bye and stuff.
And I love the fact that, to that point, right, where Batman is that foil for Superman, not in a lot of way that people think, because while, yes, they are in opposite forms of thinking, they're not really going against each other. They're not fighting each other in this book. Oddly, for some reason, constantly I see a lot of people say that they are. They're not. But the funny thing is that both of them kind of look at power and what that really means, where Superman is trying to force people into doing what they want or what he thinks is right? Because that's the big part of the book. When Superman finally comes back from his self-exile, he starts making these heroes either be better or that they're going to get locked up. And Batman, the funny thing is telling him that he's wrong, and he is wrong, right? But the funny thing is we see the other side of that coin, where mankind, through both Batman and Lex Luthor, Batman making Gotham basically a military state where the streets are patrolled by these gigantic Batman robots and nobody can do anything. And then Lex constantly being like, well, Superman and the metahumans, they're the ones that we need to worry about because they're going to kill everybody. Their recklessness is going to kill people. But yet the very first act that we see is Vandal Savage killing a woman in cold blood because of something very, very petty.
Mm-hmm.
So much so that it even shocks Norman and the Spectre, which again just goes to show like where this story tries to go with, is either side really good? What does power mean for the humans and for these superheroes?
Yeah. And it's funny too, because you get like that absolute power on full display. And I think when you're going through this at first, you're just like, okay, Superman wouldn't do that, right? But the way that he ultimately ends up doing it in the symbol of absolute power that he just is, you got to look at the dynamic that Lex is being like, I want that. I want that absolute power. And the way that Batman is controlling Gotham, he has kind of that almost absolute control. And you see that just kind of peppered throughout. And I do think it's interesting once you get to the point where a lot of the metahumans are locked up, right, in the gulag, which is made in Kansas. And you get to the point where Superman, to your point, is like, reform and do good or stay locked up type of thing. And like the prison ultimately is over. You have more people locked up than you have that can actually, they're free and save the day.
Yeah. And very interesting piece. And it, again, goes so well into dealing with that theme of like, can you force people to be good? Or are there just people who are inherently bad? The gulag built to withstand so many of these people gets filled up in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. And that's just baffling to show how many people that they've actually dealt with, but two, in the absence of Superman, how many of these kind of like more violent, not kind of like, but more violent heroes have come into play, not caring about people, which is so interesting. Why, and I would love for us to touch on them really quickly, why Norman McKay is so good at being the POV for this book.
I do want to say one thing about, because in the very beginning of the story in the first issue, when I think one of the coolest things is ultimately when he gets to the point where he's in front of the congregation and, you know, the accident happens and people are coming to him being like, we're seeking answers, but these answers are based off of superhumans, metahumans, like give me guidance, because this is kind of unprecedented for this. Like, what do we even do? Like, is this the end? And you get from his perspective before the Spectre meets him that like, and I love how he says, like, for the first time, I don't know what to say to them to give them comfort. And then it almost feels like it goes into like Ghost of Christmas Past with the Spectre, which is a usual Spectre thing, but like, okay, you're going to go look at the world. I'm going to show you through my eyes of what it looks like. And now you're kind of that beacon that he's being guided through the story of. You're almost going to be the judge. You're acting as like the prophet in this story, from like a theological aspect. You're acting as the prophet, especially at the end. And we'll get to it of once we get to Captain Marvel, Superman, and then obviously Norman, and that judgment piece. But he's kind of that judge throughout this. And it feels like the Spectre is guiding him down to, you're going to have to choose. And we're really showing you through Norman's eyes, you can't have it all. Someone has to win and someone has to lose. One ideal is going to work, one ideal is not. The way that this power struggle is being divided, it has to be an either or type of scenario. What would you do?
Which I love that, and the way, and again, props to Mark Waid's writing, because it really, you can definitely see it through that lens. But I think the other lens that you can also see it is because for those that don't know, the Spectre is basically, in a way, not fully, but like a spirit of vengeance, very similar to that of Ghost Rider. Again, very different though. And again, he comes to Norman telling him, you have to tell me who I have to punish. You have to decide. And it's interesting because there's a line that he says towards the beginning, I think, of the first book, that he says, because my faculties are not the same as what they used to be, which you could think at first, oh, it's age. He's no longer the same Spectre. But I think the more interesting route is that because there's so much gray, he can't tell what to punish. this almost like divine otherworldly being cannot understand what is going on. So he has to look at it through a human lens. But the problem is for Norman that it's hard to tell.
Yeah.
Because these people or these new age of heroes are technically heroes, but the problem is they're too violent and they don't care about people.
And that's the cool thing is you kind of get to the end of the story when the Spectre really does ask him, right before he asks him, you know, you have to choose which side between Superman and Captain Marvel. You have that all-out war that erupts. So every single ideal that they put in, that Mark Waid presented to you and that Alex Ross delivered on visually, you're like, okay, here are the metahumans, here are the good guys, here are the bad guys, here are the people that you think are in the background that are like, launch the nuke. That's the only way we can stop them. And then we get to a moment where SB, I'm curious of your thought just for a second to step away from the narrative aspect, but from like the visuals and feel of like those end moments. I think you posted maybe on our socials, one of the panels, but like the fight between Superman and Captain Marvel, the visuals. How did you feel like getting to the climax of this story at that point?
It was very well done, and obviously every panel in this book was just mesmerizing with the artwork and kind of just it looked like it was like painted pretty much. But that panel with the Superman and Shazam fight was just amazing. I'm trying to find it real quick just to admire. Beautiful. But it's mesmerizing to look at because there's so much going on in here. Like at the bottom right, you finally see Shazam and Superman dogging it out, and in the background, you're like, holy crap! Like there's so many other heroes fighting heroes and giant people flying around, and it's just truly beautiful to look at. Just all out like chaos. Like damn, this is what just freaking happened from just them not getting along or not understanding each other's ideologies or having the same ideologies that I guess heroes should have. It's very interesting. But I can't say enough good things about the artwork in this book.
Yeah.
And it's just so beautiful. I haven't gotten a chance to read to like do the character designs or whatnot in the back of it, but I want to get into that one day just to see like the behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah.
But it definitely added more weight to the tone, and just kind of as the final chapters were closing out, like damn.
One of the cool things with that, just for the style of like on that theological plane, a lot of what Alex Ross does in this very much is compared to, and you see a lot of people say this, like you're looking at stained glass windows in like a church or something or a cathedral. It just carries those elements over to almost like subliminally put you in this state. So when the dialogue comes over, like you're just really there. And again, to your point, that going back to the beginning, it is something that a lot of people shy away from. But when you fully embrace the dialogue and that revelations and judgment style delivery in this, I feel like you hear like the bells are tolling. It's doomsday, and then you get the nuclear. It's like the world is ending type of thing, and like what happens?
Yeah, which is why them using kind of like the Book of Revelation and the all these biblical imagery, because a lot of people think hellfire brimstone when they think of like biblical imagery, and yes, they're for a lot of people that is what it might be, but it's like, and I think the Book of Revelation is actually a perfect reference for what they're trying to tell, where yes, the Book of Revelation talks about destruction, but it also ends with hope, which is what we see in the book. It's this constant warning of a judgment coming. It's getting bad before it's going to get worse before it gets better. It gets really, really bad. On the wake of destruction, then comes hope, because at the end of the story, we see that, yes, despite all these, so many metahumans dying because of the nuke, Captain Marvel, one of them, because he sacrifices himself to stop it, and Superman on the verge, about to destroy the UN, he, in a way, saves himself and saves everybody because of it.
Yeah, I love that at the end when Superman really forces Captain Marvel to make a choice of like, you either fight me or you get out of here. And he's like, no, I'm going to choose the door number 3. I'm going to save us. And then Superman's like, well, you didn't save us. Everyone's gone. And then you get this just a wild spiral, like a spooky Superman appears like, oh my gosh. And then you pull Norman back in to pull Superman essentially out of that grief, and you do get that reconciliation and you get the hope piece. I just think the way that issue 4, which is called Kingdom Come, ends is one of the best endings I've ever read.
Yeah. And I love that this very, very complex book ends with the most simple of message for Superman, where, because Norman, trying to talk him down, tells him, the reason that you lost your ability to kind of know what is good and bad is because you put the super before the man. Like, you let that go. So, and he tells him, take that back, because they will never forgive you for this if you do.
Yeah.
And that calms him enough.
Yeah.
And again, if you want to boil down what they're trying to say, is that for heroes, you have to remember they have to relate to us as individuals for us to really stick to them and really fall in love with them. That's why these characters, we did fall in love with them.
Mm-hmm.
That's why Mark Waid and Alex Ross fell in love with them, because they saw how relatable they were despite being super. Absolutely love that this super complex book, in a way, not fully, but in a way, can be condensed into that page.
Yeah. So with that, I mean, we've talked a lot about, some really strong core elements from the story, but on this kind of series that we're doing this month, we're trying to take some of these elements and see how they can be applicable to the new upcoming Superman movie. So I'll flip it back to you, Hero. For you, how do you think that they could adapt some of these core themes and concepts? What could James Gunn and team have done to really showcase that or include that in the upcoming Superman movie?
I think on a smaller scale, since we know that Hawk Girl and Mr. Terrific and Guy Gardner are going to be in here, I think you can definitely have them kind of be the ones to question the old age of heroism. And kind of, maybe Guy especially can already be kind of that old wave of heroes, accepting the new way where it's like, I have to be either more violent, more abrasive for people to really acknowledge us. And I think that would be a really cool way to still kind of add basis for that story into here and take elements of it. I also think a very cool way would be have Superman really question if even being morally gray is okay. I think that's what a lot of people, and that's what, and I think that's what a lot of people want to see, right? And some people have tried and kind of failed in certain elements of that.
Yeah.
And maybe SB, I think you can kind of talk to that, because I think you had an interesting comment about what you saw in relation from this book to other live action Superman.
Yeah, it gave me, as I was reading it, I was just kind of thinking of, like, I kind of see what Zack Snyder was going for a little bit better, and still this was so much better, and he was very far off, but I kind of respected it a little bit more. Not, I can't say that. That sounds like I'm too harsh on it, because I do like Man of Steel, and Batman vs Superman Ultimate Edition made me like that story a little bit more, but it's still not like the Superman that I wanted, and still didn't really convey like the message of hope that Kingdomcome was able to by the end of it. Snyder's trilogy didn't get that chance to, but it still very much reminded me of it. Also Injustice as well. I could see where both kind of those storylines stem from this Kingdomcome run. And Injustice is just like too dark of Superman, which I guess the whole point of him turning dark and kind of like being like a true god, technically. Definitely do like it more, just taking it down to its core point, like you mentioned Hero a couple minutes ago about just like truly just being about Superman and hope, and kind of that stemming to the whole hero world. So I'd say, answer Lou's question, I would definitely like to see that whole message of hope just be boiled down into Superman for the other heroes in the world to see that, like, they shouldn't be like corporate or whatever if we do get that type of storyline with the Lord Tech suits that they have going on and stuff. I'd definitely like to see that aspect into it.
That's the big thing. And what I love about the Superman that we're going to get in comparison to the Kingdom Come world, even though it's an Elseworlds story, you're jumping into an established universe. And it seems like that's what we're going to get here in Superman. And he's been Superman for a while, and he's been superheroing in his way. And he is a symbol in a lot of ways of hope and justice and good and all those types of things. And I think it's going to start in two ways. I think to your point, Spider Brando, Lord Tech, you have kind of your group and your team of maybe new age heroes who are associated with Superman, but there's going to be a difference in terms of his brand, right? What he's willing to do, that like we've been saying, that morally gray area, and how he works with that. But then also because they're not wearing masks, right? I think we're going to get a very strong public perception and opinion on what heroes are in this world as well. But then on top of that, you're going to have, I think the biggest thing would be Lex to be that biggest manipulator for Superman's purity and what he stands for. And like, how far is Lex willing to go to defame Superman, to ruin him? And ultimately, how does Superman respond to that? Will he walk away and think it's for, like in this case, almost like Lex will channel that, like that Magog and kind of Lex in the story kind of persona of, listen, Superman, people don't want you anymore. You know what I mean? And put that on kind of public display of like, you're old news. You're done. You're not, like, nobody cares about saving the kitten in the tree, which is very true and very comparable back to Spider Brando's point of us coming off of the Zack Snyder Superman. It's not what he did. That's not who he was. He wasn't this super slash man type of character. He didn't channel that Reeves Superman aspect in a lot of ways. So really connecting to the audience in that standpoint to do very much to give us kind of the opposition of Norman in this story type of thing. And, you know, be that person who's like, hype people up that they want to press the red button.
Yeah.
We're going to save us. Superman's not going to save us. We have to take control. And I think you could really tell a very strong story, but the biggest thing, which I think a lot of us are expecting, it's going to be Superman's response. Is it going to be anything close like what we got in this story? I think that'd be a pretty cool way to do it if he kind of has a little bit of moment of like, my power is absolute. And he, you know, kind of teeters on that maybe a little bit, but there's going to be, you know, Lois or Crypto or the Fortress and all that kind of junk that's going to like pull him back to like who he is by the end of the movie.
And to that point too, and both of your points, right? Superman is your favorite hero's hero. Let's just be honest. And I think that would be awesome if they are able to portray that, where we see potentially someone like Mr. Terrific, someone who's typically very, very smart, to kind of look up to him, but still disagree because of the new world that's around them. Someone like Guy Gardner, who has been through, assumingly in this universe, a lot, right? But still can potentially look up to this newer Superman and be like, that's what I have to aspire to be.
Yeah.
And I think we haven't seen that in Superman in a very, very long time. I think Zack Snyder did a good job in making people look at Superman as something more.
Yeah.
But I think he took it too far in terms of like not essentially being the thing that we want to work towards.
Yeah.
I think it needs to be that, like, no matter who you are, you look up to Superman. I think that should also be a very huge key point that they take.
Yeah, and even just to piggyback off of that real quick, because I know there's some fans who will be watching this who are like, well, what about Superman and Lois, Tyler Hoechlin's Superman? The scale isn't there. And again, this is establishing a Superman and ideals that aren't just for a TV show or a trilogy. This is for an entire universe to truly kick it off. Mm-hmm. And what you really do here is going to set the tone for probably the next 5 to 10 years. And so to your point, the hero's hero, that's going to be huge. That's going to be huge.
Just think that Supergirl's follow up right freaking after next year.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's been Kingdom Come. If you haven't read it, or if it's been a long time since you've read it, I think all three of us urge you, please, like all the other comic stories that we are ever going to talk about this on this channel, go read it, because we and I think not just us, but a lot of other people can sit here and talk to you about these stories, the imagery, the panels. But if you're not able to read it and experience it for yourself, it is very different. So I think you do yourself a big favor if you're able to come into these types of videos as well, knowing and reading what we talk about too. So yeah, definitely get a chance, because there's also a lot that we don't have time to talk about, because if not, we'd be here for 3 hours. So
Very true.
But
you know where you can talk about that more with us in Discord.
On Discord, yes. For always, you can, if you haven't, make sure to come join us over there. But this has been the first installment of the new Superman series, talking about all these comics. Next week, we are going to be talking about Superman for all seasons. So from the day of this video dropping, you have exactly 1 week to kind of catch up with us, so that way we can all talk about it together. But everybody, once again, we have been your favorite trio of hosts, Lou, Spider Brando, and myself, Hero Scroll. As always, remember to do the 3 most important things. Just keep watching, keep reading, keep nerding out, and we will see you in the next Superman video.